Are you ready?
Hello, and you're listening to another edition of Irish Wrestle Talk. What we're going to take a look at today is the late, great Ravishing Rick Rude. A man who looked like he was chiseled from marble, a real bronzed Adonis, or the self-proclaimed sexiest man alive. Rick Rude as a heel was everything we loved to hate, because he had the looks, the charisma, and the raw talent. He had it all. Rick was from Minnesota, where there must have been something in the water as it produced some fabulous wrestling talent through the years, including Curt Hennig, Barry Darsow, and the Road Warriors, along with many others. Rick went to school with some of these guys and went on to study physical education before working as a bouncer for a little while. He was also a really talented arm wrestler and had great athletic ability and strength. But looking at the guns and the forearms on the guy, it's really no surprise. He eventually progressed into pro wrestling, encouraged by some of his pals, and was under the wing of Eddie Sharkey, who was responsible for training some other well-established guys, and Rude showed great promise here, starting his career jobbing as a babyface, which is quite hard to believe now when you look back. And he also served some time in Vancouver in the early years. Then on to Georgia and Memphis, working for various promotions, and crossed paths here with Jerry Lawler and King Kong Bundy. And during this run, Jimmy Hart managed him. And then he held some championship gold in Championship Wrestling Florida, while managed by a notable character called Percy Pringle, later to be known as the legendary Paul Bearer. And this included a tag team championship teaming with Jesse Barr. Rude and Pringle jumped ship to WCCW, and he won the NWA Heavyweight Championship here. And during this spell, approximately 1986, the name changed from WCCW to WCWA, and Rude was actually recognised as the first WCWA World Heavyweight Champion, as he was holding the belt during this transition. And during 86, he had a short-lived tag team stint with the Dingo Warrior. And we know how Dingo turned out in later years. And man, when you look back at these times and the names involved and who worked with each other, it's like an endless list of wrestling royalty. And following a short run in Jim Crockett Promotions, the WWF came calling. And in July 1987, Rick made his debut for them as part of the famous Bobby Heenan family and began feuding with Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, and he managed to defeat him at Madison Square Garden. And towards the end of that year, and following an unsuccessful attempt to dethrone the Hulkster in early 1988, he started an infamous feud with Jake the Snake Roberts, and this led to some amazing entertainment, where Rude would constantly rinse the crowd with insults before his matches and then proceed to pluck some lucky lady from the crowd to make her night with a kiss in the centre of the ring, and this was known as the Rude Awakening for the lucky woman. And if you look back at some of the footage from these days, it's all 80s hair associated with the rock bands at the time, and the airbrush tights used by Rude were customised to suit the feuds and the storylines he was involved in at any given time. But going back to the Jake the Snake feud, one of the ladies that Rude tried to pick from the audience during one segment happened to be Cheryl Roberts, Jake's wife. And she, of course, rejected the advances of the Ravishing One, pissing him off, which led to Jake rushing down to ringside to intervene. And according to Jake, in later years, the smack that his missus delivered to Rick did a number on his eardrum, allegedly. And later that week, Rude unveiled a new set of tights with Cheryl's face painted across the front. Hilarious stuff. So out comes Jake once again to strip him down in footage that was actually censored for home viewership, letting fans believe that Rude was Starkers when in fact he was wearing a skin-coloured set of underwear. And their entertaining feud came to a conclusion at the Survivor Series in 1988, and Jake got his revenge, winning with his patented DDT. But it was a good, fun storyline and quite memorable for a number of reasons. And Rude followed this up with a storyline involving the Ultimate Warrior, where the two guys squared off in a special pose down. And given the sculpted physiques of both stars, it seemed like a good idea, right? But sporting another set of tights with the Intercontinental Championship emblazoned on them, Rude managed to win the IC Championship at WrestleMania 5 with a little help from his old friend Bobby the Brain Heenan. And this storyline between the two went on to SummerSlam, where Warrior got his belt back, and the shenanigans that played out here opened the door for Rick's next storyline against Rowdy Roddy Piper, which led to a Survivor Series matchup between the two men and their respective teams. The Rude Brood of Rick, Perfect, and Jack and Raymond Rougeau versus Roddy's Rowdies, which was Piper, Jimmy Snuka, and the Bushwhackers. And the two captains got counted out at this one, and followed up with many more matches in the months afterwards before the angle finally fizzled out. But following the Ultimate Warrior's famous win at WrestleMania 6 against Hulk Hogan, he clashed with Rick once again in later 1990, and the stage was set for a SummerSlam encounter between the two men. And this is where we got to witness some classic vignettes of Rude in serious training. He declared he was abstaining from the women so he could focus on the things that mattered the most. He even chopped off the mullet and was training with speed bags that were customized with the Warrior's face. And then we had Bobby Heenan acting as the Mickey-like character to Rude's Rocky-like character in training. And this was another example showcasing the talent Rude had on the mic. And despite the comical aspects surrounding Rude's character, he was exceptionally gifted inside and outside of the ring. He had the ability to carry the likes of the Warrior and make him look good in their matches, which was no easy feat for any wrestler. And additionally, if you think of sellers or even oversellers in the wrestling business, then Rick Rude is right up there with the very best, especially after taking an atomic drop where he struggled to do his hip swivel with the after effects. And the SummerSlam event was booked as a steel cage matchup, and Warrior won this one, which also ended the feud, and Rick was scheduled to work another angle then with the Big Boss Man afterwards, but due to some backstage disputes, this never really got going before Rude left the company attempting to work with the Ultimate Wrestling Federation, where his debut here was delayed because of the disputes with WWF. Rude then had a short-lived stint in All Japan Wrestling before moving on to WCW, like many other wrestlers did when they departed WWF. And Rick worked here between 91 and 94 and was involved with the Dangerous Alliance. He also won the US Championship, defeating Sting, then had a number of failed attempts to beat Ron Simmons for the World Heavyweight Championship, and he then suffered a legitimate neck injury, which meant he had to forfeit his title after a long reign that spanned 14 months. But following his recuperation, he worked some matches against Dusty Rhodes in an attempt to win back the gold, but failed to do so. He then set his sights on the NWA Heavyweight Championship and defeated Ric Flair at Fall Brawl in 1993. This title was, of course, repurposed as the WCW World Heavyweight Championship, and Rude held it from September 93 through to March 94, losing to Hiroshi Hase before winning it days later once again, and then dropping it to Sting in April, and then winning it back on May the 1st. But in doing so, he actually destroyed his back during this encounter, meaning he couldn't continue with the title reign. And this was packaged up in a storyline where he was stripped of the title because he used it as a weapon during his match. But in reality, Rude was unable to participate and had to retire shortly after this. And a little controversy followed here, as Rude had an insurance policy with Lloyd's of London, like many other wrestlers, and he cashed this in due to the injury, meaning he couldn't wrestle anymore. He legally could not wrestle. So, however, with the creative forces within the wrestling universe, there are always ways and means of circumventing issues such as these. So in 97, he joined ECW and was booked to appear at Heatwave. But he didn't take any bumps in this match, where he teamed with Tommy Dreamer and Sandman. He subsequently betrayed his team, and he wasn't even dressed in wrestling gear anyway, so he didn't break any rules per se. He also did a bit of colour commentary, and then in August of 97 he returned to the WWF, working with D-Generation X as an insurance policy type character, accompanying them to ringside, although never competing. He just stood there in his suit, looking tough and intimidating. But following the Montreal Screwjob at Survivor Series, he departed once again, and according to Bret Hart, Rude stayed in the locker room during the Vince and Bret confrontation, which looked to be an act of loyalty and as backup for Bret in case anything kicked off. He made his way back to WCW following this, and in something unique, he managed to appear on Monday Night Nitro and WWE Raw on the same night, which is crazy when you think about it. But this was all due to how the tapings were done and the syndication and so on. So back in WCW, he was a member of the famous NWO, and he got to work alongside his longtime friend, Kurt Hennig, once again. The guys had grown up together and they were just lifelong friends. However, Rick Rude passed away in April 1999 at only 40, and far earlier than he should have. He was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2017, and it's sometimes difficult to believe he was only 40, as he'd achieved so much. But from all his time in pro wrestling, the stint that stands out the most is his time as Ravishing Rick Rude in WWF, where he's most fondly remembered, and because of the impression he left on the WWE's landscape. He was the total package with exceptional ability and a great finisher, the Rude Awakening. He made others look good, he was loyal, he was a legitimate tough guy, and whenever he's mentioned by other wrestlers in their stories or interviews, you can clearly see he was a popular figure, and I think he may be underrated in a way. He held the Intercontinental Championship in WWE, but he never quite made it to that next stage, and perhaps should have been heavyweight champion. I know he feuded with Hulk Hogan briefly, but that didn't amount to much. But I think he was a legitimate talent that should have held the main belt. What do you guys think? But let's hear from the man himself.
What I'd like to have right now is for all you fat, ugly Huntsville heifers, keep the noise down while I take my robe off and show the ladies the sexiest man on God's green earth. Hit the music.
Look at cameras are ready, McMahon. Yep. Now in just a second, you'll see why. There. That's what they see.
So there you have it. It's always the sexiest guy on God's green earth. Brilliant stuff. Look, thanks once again for joining me today, guys, for another look back at classic wrestling. And if you enjoy this content, then make sure to like, subscribe, and follow. And until next time, take care and keep grappling with greatness.